I stood in that wedding dress, smiling for the cameras, while everyone around me celebrated. But what I didn't know, was that I had just married a man they kept locked in the basement. And by the time I discovered the truth, it was already too late to run. But not too late for revenge. If you've ever felt trapped by people who thought they were smarter than you, stay with me. Because this story is for everyone who was ever underestimated. My name is Adana, and I grew up in a small village where poverty wasn't just a condition, it was an identity. I was 23 when this happened. The eldest of 5 children. My father was dead. My mother was sick. And every morning, I woke up to the sound of my siblings' empty stomachs growling. I wasn't educated beyond secondary school. But I was beautiful, or so everyone said. And in my village, beauty was a currency more valuable than a university degree. It could buy food. It could pay hospital bills. It could save a family. So when the proposal came, my mother cried tears of joy. And I convinced myself those tears were worth whatever price I had to pay. The Okonkwo family was everything we were not. Rich. Influential. Respected. Their compound had gates that gleamed in the sunlight, and cars that cost more than my entire village combined. When Mr. Okonkwo first came to our house, he didn't look at me the way men usually did. There was something else in his eyes. Something that looked almost like relief. Or maybe desperation. But I was too young, too desperate myself, to recognize it. My son needs a good wife, he said, placing an envelope thick with money on our wooden table. A woman of virtue. Of strength. My mother's hands shook as she reached for the envelope. I watched her fingers trace the edges, and we both knew, that this money meant my siblings would eat for months. Maybe a year. He's a good boy, Mrs. Okonkwo added quickly. Too quickly. Just shy. Very shy. He doesn't like to go out much. I should have asked questions. Why would such a wealthy family choose someone like me? Why had I never seen this son they spoke of? Why did they seem so eager, so rushed? But hunger has a way of silencing questions. Poverty has a way of making you grateful before you even know what you're being grateful for. The bride price was enormous. More than any girl in our village had ever received. My mother kept saying it was a blessing. That God had finally remembered us. And I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The weeks before the wedding were strange. They never let me meet my husband-to-be. Tradition, they said. He wants to see his bride for the first time at the altar. It sounded romantic when Mrs. Okonkwo said it, her voice soft and persuasive. But at night, alone in my room, I felt something cold settle in my chest. A whisper that said, run. But where would I run to? Back to poverty. Back to watching my siblings cry from hunger. Back to my mother's coffin that grew worse every day. So I silenced that whisper. I buried it deep. And I told myself that whatever waited for me in that big house would be better than what I was leaving behind. I remember the morning of the wedding. My mother braided my hair with trembling fingers. She kept stopping to wipe her eyes. You're saving us, she whispered. You're saving all of us. And I smiled. Because that's what good daughters do. We smile when we're drowning. We smile when we're being sold. We smile because someone else's survival depends on it. The wedding was grand. Too grand. As if they were trying to make everyone focus on the ceremony instead of the groom. I walked down that aisle in a dress that cost more than my father's funeral, and at the end of it stood a man I had never seen before. He was handsome. That was the first surprise. Tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. When he took my hand, his grip was soft, almost childlike. He kept looking back at his parents, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Hello, I whispered. I'm Adana. He smiled wider. Pretty Adana. Something in the way he said it made my skin prickle. Like a child repeating words he'd been taught. But the music swelled, and people were clapping, and before I could process anything, I was being pronounced as Mrs. Okonkwo. The reception was a blur of strangers congratulating me, of food I couldn't taste, of music that felt too loud. My husband, Chidi, they called him, sat beside me, eating with his hands in a way that seemed almost primitive. His mother kept wiping his mouth. His father kept making toast, his voice too jovial, too desperate to convince everyone that this was normal. When the celebration finally ended and we arrived at the Okonkwo mansion, I expected to be shown to the master bedroom. Instead, Mrs. Okonkwo took my hand, her grip surprisingly tight. Let me show you something, my dear, she said. Her voice had lost its warmth. So there are no misunderstandings. She led me through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms with closed doors, down a staircase I hadn't noticed before. The air grew colder. Damper. And then I understood. We were going to the basement. My son is special, she said as we descended. He had an accident when he was young. He's different. But he's harmless. Mostly harmless. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. What do you mean, different? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened a heavy door, and the smell hit me first. Unwashed bodies. Decay. Fear. The room was large but furnished like a prison. A bed with restraints. Padded walls. And in the corner, rocking back and forth, was a man who looked like Chidi but wasn't the one I had married. This is Chidi, Mrs. Okonkwo said softly. Your real husband. The man upstairs, that's his twin brother, Emeka. We couldn't let people see Chidi like this. Bad for business. Bad for the family name. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The man in the corner had started making sounds, low, animalistic sounds that raised every hair on my body. You tricked me, I managed to whisper. We saved you, Mr. Okonkwo's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard him follow us down. Your family was starving. We gave them money. Dignity. All we asked in return was that you play your part. Be the dutiful wife. Smile at gatherings. Give us respectability. And what about him? I pointed at the rocking figure. What about Chidi? You take care of him, Mrs. Okonkwo said simply. Feed him. Bathe him. Keep him calm. That's what wives do, isn't it? They take care of their husbands. I don't remember walking back upstairs. I don't remember entering the room they had prepared for me, a beautiful room with sea curtains and a bed softer than anything I'd ever slept on. I just remember sitting on the edge of that bed as the sun rose, still in my wedding dress, trying to understand what my life had become. I had been bought. Not married. Bought. Like cattle. Like property. And I had let it happen because I thought I was saving my family. The first week was the hardest. They made me go down to the basement twice a day. Morning and evening. To feed Chidi. To clean him. He didn't recognize me as his wife. He barely recognized me as human. Sometimes he was calm, sitting in the corner humming to himself. Other times he was violent, screaming and throwing things, and I had to call for the guards they kept stationed nearby. Mrs. Okonkwo taught me how to handle him. Don't make sudden movements. Don't raise your voice. If he starts to get agitated, sing. He likes singing. I felt like I was losing my mind. During the day, I had to play the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. Smiling at visitors. Attending church. Pretending that my husband was simply too busy with business to attend social functions. And at night, I descended into hell to care for a man who sometimes didn't even remember I'd been there an hour before. I called my mother once, desperate to hear her voice. To tell her what they'd done. But when she answered, she sounded so happy. So healthy. The money bought medicine, she said. The doctor says I'm getting better. And your siblings, Adana, they're all in school now. Good schools. They have uniforms. Books. They're eating 3 times a day. I hung up without telling her. Because what could I say? That I wanted to come home. That I wanted to take back their medicine, their food, their hope. What kind of sister would I be? So I swallowed my screams. I buried my horror. And I played my part. But something was changing inside me. Every time I walked down those basement stairs, every time I looked at Chidi rocking in his corner, every time Mrs. Okonkwo reminded me to be grateful for what we've given you, something hard and cold formed in my chest. They had bought my body. But they had made a mistake. They assumed that because I was poor and uneducated, I was also powerless. Also stupid. Also permanently defeated. They didn't know that poverty teaches you things that wealth never can. It teaches you how to survive. How to observe. How to wait. How to recognize that every system, no matter how strong, has cracks. And I was going to find every single crack in theirs. It started with patience. I stopped resisting. I stopped crying in my room at night. Instead, I became the perfect daughter-in-law. Obedient. Quiet. Grateful. But while I smiled and served them tea, I was watching. Learning. I learned that Mr. Okonkwo's wealth came from construction contracts, many of which he secured through bribes and falsified documents. I learned this because he kept those documents in his study, and I had learned to move through that house like a ghost. I learned that Mrs. Okonkwo had a lover. A young man she met every Thursday at a hotel downtown. I learned this because I followed her once, curious about where she went when she claimed to be visiting her sister. I learned that Emeka, my fake husband, Chidi's twin, was secretly planning to have his brother declared legally dead so he could inherit everything. I learned this because I listened at doors, piecing together conversations that weren't meant for my ears. But most importantly, I learned how to take care of Chidi. Really take care of him. Not as a burden, but as a human being. I spent hours in that basement, talking to him even when he didn't respond. Singing to him. Slowly, carefully, he began to trust me. To come when I entered. To reach for my hand. The doctors had given up on him years ago. But I hadn't studied medicine. I hadn't studied anything. I just knew what it felt like to be treated as less than human. And I refused to do that to someone else, no matter what his family had done to me. 6 months into my marriage, something happened. I was in the basement, singing a lullaby my mother used to sing to us, when Chidi spoke. Actually spoke. Not the grunts and nonsense sounds he usually made, but words. Mama, he said, looking directly at me. Mama used to sing that. I froze. You remember your mother singing to you? He nodded slowly. Before the accident. Before they put me down here. My heart stopped. Chidi, what accident? And then, piece by piece, in fragments that took weeks to fully assemble, he told me the truth. There had been no accident. Not in the way they claimed. Chidi had been normal. Healthy. But he had also been rebellious. He had fallen in love with a poor girl, like me, and had threatened to marry her against his family's wishes. He had threatened to expose his father's corrupt business dealings. So they drugged him. Had him committed to a psychiatric facility where doctors they paid diagnosed him with a condition he didn't have. They pumped him full of medications that made him confused, disoriented, unable to think clearly. And when he was sufficiently broken, they brought him home and locked him in the basement. They made me crazy, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't. I held him while he cried. And I made a decision. I was going to destroy them. Not with violence. Not with confrontation. But with the same weapons they had used against me, deception, patience, and the law. I started by slowly reducing Chidi's medications. He was on a cocktail of powerful psychiatric drugs that I had been told were essential for his condition. But with the knowledge that his condition was manufactured, I began to question everything. I couldn't stop them all at once, that would be noticed. But I could dilute them. Skip doses occasionally. And gradually, over months, Chidi began to wake up. Like someone emerging from a long, terrible dream. His moments of clarity grew longer. He began to remember more. His parents. His brother. What they had done to him. And the more he remembered, the angrier he became. But I taught him to hide it. Just as I was hiding my own rage. Not yet, I would whisper during our sessions in the basement. They need to believe nothing has changed. Can you do that? He learned to play the part they expected. The broken son. The mad one. But when we were alone, he was becoming himself again. Meanwhile, I was building my case. I had started documenting everything. The medications they were giving Chidi. The restraints in the basement. I found medical records they had hidden, records from before his accident showing a perfectly healthy young man. I made copies of Mr. Okonkwo's corrupt business documents. I photographed Mrs. Okonkwo with her lover. But I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. So I did something risky. I reached out to the one person I thought might care, Emeka, the twin. I had been watching him, and I had seen something the others hadn't. Guilt. Every time he passed by the basement door, his face would tighten. Every time someone mentioned his brother, he would look away. He was complicit in this horror, yes. But I didn't think he was heartless. One evening, I cornered him in the hallway. I know about your plan to have Chidi declared dead, I said quietly. He went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. But what you don't know is that it won't work. Because your brother isn't crazy. He never was. Your parents destroyed him. And you helped them. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I cut him off. But I'm giving you a choice. Help me save your brother, or I expose everything. Your father's corruption. Your mother's affair. The fact that you all committed fraud during our wedding ceremony. Everything. He stared at me for a long moment. Why would you do this? What do you gain? Justice, I said simply. And my freedom. Help me, and I'll make sure you're protected when this all comes out. Refuse, and you go down with them. It took him 3 days to decide. But eventually, he came to me with his answer, what do you need me to do? The plan took another 6 months to execute. We had to be careful. Methodical. One wrong move and the Okonkwo family would destroy all the evidence and probably destroy me in the process. Emeka helped me gather more documents. He testified on tape about what his parents had done. He used his connections to get real doctors, not the ones on his father's payroll, to evaluate Chidi. Their diagnosis was unanimous, Chidi was suffering from the long-term effects of being overmedicated with powerful psychiatric drugs. There was no underlying mental illness. I reached out to the young woman Chidi had loved before all this happened. She had moved to the city, become a lawyer. When I told her what had been done to him, she agreed to help us build a legal case. And then I waited for the perfect moment. It came during a lavish party the Okonkwo's threw to celebrate Mr. Okonkwo's latest government contract. All of society was there. Politicians. Business people. Family friends. Everyone who mattered. I had spent hours getting ready, playing the part of the perfect daughter-in-law one last time. But hidden in my purse were flash drives containing all the evidence we had gathered. And Emeka had made sure that certain journalists would be present at the party. Midway through the evening, I asked to make a speech. Mrs. Okonkwo looked surprised but pleased. She probably thought I was going to thank them for saving me from poverty. Instead, I stood up in front of all those powerful people and said, I want to tell you all about my husband. My real husband, Chidi Okonkwo. The son this family keeps locked in their basement. The room went silent. Mr. Okonkwo stood up, his face purple with rage. Sit down. Now. But I didn't sit down. Instead, I told them everything. About the deception. About Chidi's true condition. About the years of imprisonment and forced medication. About the fraud they had committed during our wedding. And for anyone who thinks I'm lying, I said, pulling out the flash drives, I have evidence. Medical records. Financial documents. Testimonies. Even video footage. It's all here. And copies have already been delivered to the police, the media, and several government agencies. The chaos that followed was beautiful. Mr. Okonkwo tried to rush me, but Emeka stepped between us. Mrs. Okonkwo fainted, or pretended to. Guests were pulling out their phones, taking pictures, recording videos. The journalists were already calling their editors. By the next morning, the Okonkwo family was front-page news. Not as the respected pillars of society they pretended to be, but as the monsters they actually were. The legal battles took over a year. But in the end, justice came. Mr. Okonkwo was arrested for fraud, bribery, and unlawful imprisonment. His business empire collapsed as partners distanced themselves and investigators uncovered decades of corruption. He's now serving 15 years in prison. Mrs. Okonkwo was charged as an accessory to her husband's crimes and for the unlawful detention of her own son. Her affair became public knowledge, and the social circles she once dominated turned their backs on her. She lost everything she cared about, her reputation, her status, her position in society. The marriage between Chidi and myself was annulled. It had been fraudulent from the beginning. But something unexpected happened during those months of planning and fighting together. Chidi and I became friends. Real friends. Not bound by a fake marriage, but by shared trauma and the long road to healing. He's still recovering. The medications they gave him for so many years did damage that can't be undone overnight. But he's getting better. He's back in therapy, real therapy, with doctors who actually care. He started painting again, something he loved before they took everything from him. And slowly, day by day, he's reclaiming the life they stole. Emeka kept his word and testified against his parents. Because of his cooperation, he received a lighter sentence, probation and community service. He's also been working to make amends, using his share of the family assets to establish a foundation for victims of psychiatric abuse. As for me, I took the settlement money from the annulment and did something my younger self would never have imagined. I went back to school. I'm studying law now. Because I learned something important during this nightmare, the system can be used to hurt people, but it can also be used to protect them. And I want to be on the side of protection. My family is taken care of. The money the Okonkwo's paid as bride price was legally mine, and I made sure my mother got the medical treatment she needed and my siblings got their education. But more importantly, I'm teaching them something I learned the hard way. That no amount of money is worth selling yourself for. That poverty is hard, but losing yourself is harder. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry. If I hate the Okonkwo family for what they did to me. The truth is more complicated than that. I'm angry, yes. At the injustice. At the cruelty. At the way they treated both Chidi and me as tools to be used rather than people to be respected. But I also understand something now that I couldn't see when I was drowning in my own desperation. They didn't trick just me. They tricked themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Okonkwo were so obsessed with reputation, with status, with maintaining the illusion of perfection that they destroyed their own son. They sacrificed real love, real family, real humanity on the altar of what will people think. And in the end, it cost them everything. The irony is that the thing they were trying so hard to hide, Chidi's supposed madness, was nothing compared to the real madness of what they did to him. If they had simply let him marry who he wanted, live his own life, be his own person, they would still have their family, their business, their reputation. But they chose control over love, appearance over truth. And that choice destroyed them far more thoroughly than I ever could. I was just the catalyst. The one who refused to keep their secret. The one who chose truth over comfort. But the real destruction, that was always waiting inside their own choices. If this story reminded you of your own strength, or if you know someone who needs to hear it tonight, I hope you share it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we are not alone. That we've survived before. And we'll survive again. Until next time, remember, they might trick you once, but they underestimate you at their own risk.